Hey y'all, Monk Joseph here with the Broken Buddha. Today I'm going to continue from a video from last night that I did on cannabis edibles with activation, and then I discussed a little bit about panic attacks and how it applies to yogi life. But I'm going to do the whole dissertation video, like a full oral dissertation here on everything from modern cannabis use to activation into an edible compound, into extraction. I'll even throw in a quick recipe at the end, and then how these things apply to yogi life. But let me just dive right in. This video is for informational purposes only. I am not a medical doctor, prescribed or certified or legally allowed to say anything involving medical stuff. I can say whatever I want, but you need to know that I am not a medical doctor telling you these things, okay? Or a trained scientist. But let's go ahead and get right into this. So the first thing you're going to do is, because we're only going to talk about edible cannabis, I'm not going to talk about anything smokable. I once had a shaman tell me cannabis is okay with right dose and administration, telling me, not to don't take too much and take it orally is pretty much what he said. And he doesn't ever use anything like that, but he just was just talking one day and just randomly talking about that. So all right, so we're just going to talk about the edible cannabis, and let me jump right in. So what you get when you get cannabis is called THCA. It's a smokable compound, or the compound that's more, when you smoke it, it's going to give you the best effect for your body. When you eat cannabis, you're consuming what's called THCB. So when you eat it, it's going to have the better effect on your body, and it provides more solubility to the liver, so the compound can break down into your liver better and get absorbed into your bloodstream for whatever intended purpose you have. Um, so the first thing you need to do is take whatever, I like to use either a half ounce or a whole ounce of flour as a control for these things, but take your flour, break it down to pieces a little bit smaller than about half the size of a piece of your average piece of popcorn, maybe a little smaller. It should be, when I say a small piece of popcorn, you should know exactly what I mean when you break it up into that right size piece. All right, so you'll break it all up into small size popcorn pieces and put it flat on either a baking tray. I use a Pyrex bowl, a really wide concave Pyrex bowl, because you can still flatten everything against it. And what I noticed, if you use foil or something, you'll notice that residue, that's all trichomes that you're losing. And you obviously want to avoid that. So if you use a big the real wide Pyrex bowl, you can lay it all flat in there and give it a mix and use that same bowl all the way from activation to mixing whatever batter you're going to mix. All right. So once you're activated, and for activation, I go with the 250 at 30 minutes, 250 degrees Fahrenheit at 30 minutes, because the activation, uh, imagine there's a bar chart here and you've got temperature and time. The 30 minutes at 250 gives you that real long peak time. If you go high temperature, it'll spike really quick and then drop really quick, and it's impossible to catch that. Same thing with going low temperature, it'll go up low and up slow and then down fast. But that 250 at 30 minutes, this is the whole 30 minutes. The middle right there is 30. You've got some wiggle room there. It's not going to spike anywhere where you got to catch it just in time. You can play with 5 or 10 minutes here or there, and you're not going to lose that much potency. All right, so that's why I do 250 at 30 minutes. Again, I do it in the bowl to avoid any trichome loss. Now we're going to go to, that's it. That's all you do. You're done. If you're going to bake it for 30 minutes at 250 Fahrenheit, you want to give it a stir maybe every 10 minutes, but you don't have to. But it's good to not burn the edges of the compound. Give it a little stir by hand and then put it back in. Maybe add an extra 5 minutes for the heat loss time period. Or if you need extra time for the flour to heat up, I don't know what you're putting it in, but 250 for 30 minutes seems to be a good standard. Now, for infusion, we're going to get rid of the crock pot and cheesecloths. The first thing I ever did was say, this is stupid, it doesn't make any sense. I've never used crock pot and cheesecloth. It's just, to me, that's like the lazy stoner way to make canna butter. You just set it and forget it, kind of. The reason why is because cannabis edibles are all about 3 things: activation, cracking cell walls, and agitation. You can't crack nearly as many cell walls in the plant flower with it inside the cheesecloth, and you can't agitate it to really get the oils in there to pull the fats, the medicinal fats out, and this whole process. So forget all that stuff. Keep it in the Pyrex bowl. Have your oven set to 170 or 190, whatever the lowest is. Just don't go above 230. Don't go above 200. If you can stand at 200, great. But you definitely don't want to get anywhere near 230, because that's when the THCB is going to start over converting and taking the strength out of the compound. All right, so you've got your activated flower in your Pyrex bowl. Now you want to add your oil. I like to use recipes that use a half cup to a whole cup of oil. I use coconut oil because you want a high fat content. You don't got to make vegan gluten free brownies because they're great for you. You want to make vegan gluten free brownies because the coconut oil has a lot more saturated fat, which is your extraction power in cannabis. So, right now I'm using a virgin cold pressed organic coconut oil, which has 14 grams of fat, 13 of them are saturated fat. You're not getting any higher than that in the saturated fat world unless you're using like pure MCT oil. But that's what the powerhouse is to extract the medicine out of the flower. You can add lecithin to boost the amount of fat, whether it's sunflower or soy, but you shouldn't need it if you're using a 13, 14 coconut oil like that. You're not going to get the percentage any higher. All right. So, but you can add lecithin, like about a tablespoon of lecithin to any of these mixes and use it for the extraction. When you put the oil in, add in the lecithin, but you don't need it, but that'll boost your extraction power. Okay. So, and then you want to get. I use I always forget which one's the mortar and the pestle, but out of my mortar and pestle, I have the grinder piece, not the bowl. I use the Pyrex. Be very careful with grinding anything in Pyrex because it is glass. So if you don't want to grind if you feel glass, you went too far. I actually only do about one pass per roll of the grinder on the Pyrex and making sure that you only hear leaves cracking. You'll notice the difference because when you hit the glass, it's like smooth and soft, and it doesn't feel bad, but you're touching a stone to glass, and you should always be careful with anything like that. I haven't had any issues. My Pyrex is still pretty clean, mostly scratch free, but you should be aware of this when you're doing this. All right. Now for the infusion process, I say 3 hours and overnight, but you could do this in an hour. You could easily grind it every 10 minutes for an hour, and you'd have that soft sand at the bottom that you want. It's no more buds. It's just a big pile of dirt pretty much at the bottom of some oil, and you got to strain it. But I'm going too fast here. Okay, so you have your flour in your bowl. You've put in your lecithin or your coconut oil. You're going back into the oven for 170 to 170 degrees or 190 degrees Fahrenheit. No hotter than 230. Really try to stay away from that temperature at all costs. I would even say infusing over the day in the sunlight for hours or even a day would be better than letting it go that hot. You don't want it to go hot. You're gonna either overactivate your compound into a weaker form of THCB, or you're gonna straight degrade the THC into not being a functional medicine anymore. All right. So you've done that. You've done your first grind. You need a wire whisk to agitate and rest it. Edibles are about three things: activation, cell wall cracking, and agitation. So you've activated it. Now you've got your grinder to crack the cell walls, and then you'll use your whisk to shake in the medicine. And at first it'll be hard to get it all to mix, but eventually you'll just have like a layer of silt and then your oil. And that's what you want when you're done. But that's at the end of 3 hours, so let's not jump ahead. So personally, I do it every 30 minutes, but you can do it every 20 to 30 minutes. Take the bowl out of the oven, grind it, whisk it. Okay, again, it's activated. Crack the cell walls, agitate it, get a spatula, hit the edges, put it back in. And again, do that every 20 to 30 minutes if you're taking your time for the 3 hours, every 10 minutes if you're trying to get it done in an hour. And then after that, when you're done, you keep doing that until it has like a silt layer, and it's just silt and oil. All right. I did forget one thing. When you'll know that your cannabis is perfectly activated when if you grab a piece and you smash between your fingers and roll it, it should feel like wet sand, and it should be completely dry. It's completely dry cannabis with the oil in it that makes it feel like the wet sand, but you want like a wet sand feel, and that's how you'll know if anything's decarboxylated. If it's still like lumpy and you can't squeeze it into wet sand, then it's not fully activated, and you should go a little longer. But you should always be able to use that as a standard. You grab a bud, play with it, turns into wet sand, you're activated. All right, so anyway, we've covered activation, we've covered infusion. That's the 3 hour process. Every 30 minutes, you've activated it, you add in your fats, you grind it, you whisk it, spatula it, put it in the oven. You've taken it out every 10 or 30 minutes, done the same thing until now it's just a layer of cannabis, silt, and oil on top. What I do is I use a fine, very fine metal strainer, and I just strain it right off the top to get as much oil as I can cleanly through, and then spatula it down in, And then what you filtered is good. You want to leave a very small amount of plant residue is good because it'll give you a sedative effect. So it doesn't, unless you're trying to give yourself like a super clean panic attack or something. But otherwise, you want that slightly sedative effect. So using the fine metal mesh is good enough. When you're done with that, you take that out. Again, you're ready with that, the stuff you already strained. You'll squeeze a coffee filter, take what's in the metal mesh, put it in a coffee filter, cut half of it off so you don't absorb too much oil into the filter, and then you'll squeeze that in over the metal screen again. So you filter all of your oil into a metal screen. I like to use a coffee cup, the screen, and then the handle of the screen sitting on another coffee cup is the best way I've found to do it. It won't leak over the edges, don't worry about that. And again, so when you're done, you've got your silt and your oil, you strain it, scrape it into the metal screen, put it into the coffee filter, squeeze that over top of the metal screen. Save that because you're gonna make tea out of that, like really stinking strong tea when you run out of flour sometimes. So take that and set it aside. It'll be fine for a while, up to like I'd say a month. You'll be fine just chilling there. I know people will argue this with me, but it's tea, so don't worry. And if you're using, my rule of thumb is if you're using a half ounce of flour, that'll make 4 cups of very, very strong cannabis tea. And if you're using an ounce, obviously you would make 8 cups with that. But you'll just take that big ball you squeeze later on when you're done all this, cut it into fours, and then wrap it in a coffee filter, tie it with a tea bag string, cut the excess off, and you've got yourself a fancy little cannabis tea bag there. All right, so we've got it cooked, strained, and that's it. So now you've got your cup of mostly fully filtered, just the perfect amount of sediment to create a slightly sedative effect, but not too much. And then you've got a really clean medicine there. You could run the whole thing through a filter, but trust me, just don't get the crappy dollar store metal screen. Go get the really nice, I think it's called like Farberware or something. Get the really nice fine metal screen, and it'll strain smooth. It'll give you a much better, cleaner product and the perfect amount of plant matter left over. Okay, so we're down to the oil. I'll give you a really quick recipe for gluten-free brownies from scratch. You're going to use a half a cup of gluten-free flour. I'm sorry, I already messed up. Start over. Forget anything I said. All right, gluten-free vegan brownies. 3/4 of a cup of gluten-free flour or any type of root flour like cassava, and then a half a cup of cocoa powder. Try to get the stuff with alkali or called red Dutch processed cocoa, but you'll see the stuff with alkali. You don't need to. It's good without it if you do it right, but you want about a half cup of cocoa, a 1/4 teaspoon of salt, but you can do without it. And if you're baking, you want to use a 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda, not to be confused with baking powder. You want baking soda if you're baking. But if you're not baking, you don't really need it. Like if you're doing something like, if you want to keep all your strength, you'll just make a super floury kind of dough that you can mold, but not too soft, not too hard. And then you just put it in the fridge, and that'll stop you from degrading the terpenes any further and having the maximum. Then you can add other entheogens to it, and you don't got to worry about it degrading the other entheogen or anything like that. I personally don't do that, but it is something that you can do if you are of that nature to put something else in there that shouldn't be cooked. But if you are cooking, add the baking soda. All right, and you'll have that all in one bowl mixed up and have it separate. That's your powder bowl. Next, you have your bowl that you just mixed all your oils in. It should be filtered into a coffee mug by now. Dump that into the liquid bowl. Get it nice and scraped out. Then you'll add a cup of sugar. If you're going dairy-free like me, you'll use flax. I use a tablespoon and a half of flax to every egg that would be used. So I use 3 tablespoons of flax for the egg. And then I think it's like 1 tablespoon of flax to 3 tablespoons of water makes an egg. But I just do it by eye at this point. So I just do 3 tablespoons, and then I add water till it looks like runny eggs, and then I use that. And then a tablespoon of vanilla extract. I use organic, but you don't have to. Baking, they say baking vanilla is better, but I'm old fashioned. I always just use the old school vanilla extract. Try to get organic if you can. If you can't, otherwise, not a big deal. But you mix up the liquid bowl, keep your powder bowl separate, get the liquid bowl all mixed in, adding the flax or egg last if you do egg. And then you whip that in, and then you add in the powders, and then you mix that in, you've got your batter. You can obviously sub out the oil that I use for a half a pan. I use a half a cup of oil to a half ounce of flour. For a whole pan, I use a whole cup of oil to a whole ounce of flour. But the recipe I just gave you is for a half a pan. That's a 9x9 or 8x8 pan. And again, that's a cup, 3/4 of a cup of gluten-free flour, a half a cup of cocoa, a quarter of a teaspoon of baking soda, a quarter teaspoon of salt. It can be iodized or not. And then you'll mix that in your powder bowl separately. Make sure it's good and mixed. Separate that aside. And this is a from scratch recipe if you guys didn't figure that out yet. And then your liquid bowl, you've got your oil, which is through the half ounce recipe is going to be a half a cup of coconut oil. It should already be infused. And then you'll add a whole cup of sugar, preferably cane sugar. Then you'll do a tablespoon of vanilla extract. And lastly, your whipped flax or egg, whatever you're doing, into there and mix it all together. Get yourself a nice greased, powdered 8x8 or 9x9, dump it all in. If you're doing baking, when you bake it, you're going to lose 13%. This is a fact. Look it up. If you're baking at full temperature, you're going to lose 13%. So if you're putting in, half ounce of flour in a half a cup or a half a pan, you're going to lose 13% of that baking. I think it's worth it. All right. If you don't have, even if you can't add the 13%, what would that be? That'd be like, you'd have to add in like an extra gram and a half or something like that. If it was a whole pan, I don't want to get into the math too much anyway, but you're only losing like a gram or something like that. And spread apart over 16 brownies is not that big of a deal. I think 13%. This is going to drive me crazy now. So that's half of 25%, which would be, yeah, so it's about a gramish. It's not a lot, but I say it's worth it to bake it. Otherwise, you could get left with like this puddle of nonsense that you can't really use or work with. And then of course you got to rebake it, then you burn it. Now you're overcooking your compound. You've heated it too long and it's overcooked. So cooking is always is precarious from where I'm sitting with that. But you can always, if I had to cook my brownies and I want consistency, I'm doing it for 350, trying for 20 minutes, but sometimes it takes 30. If you go at 225, I believe it takes an hour. But I've never done it with the flax. The flax is too volatile to do that with. You can't mix flax and do a lot of temperature playing. So I either do it, so I go full temperature and lose the 13%. But if you have it, just get an extra gram and a half, or just throw an extra gram and a half and you're not losing any if you're trying to calculate exact amounts. We'll get into calculating next. But beyond that, if you do want to bake it, just make sure it's a little bit liquidy, but not too much. Enough that it can mold to the pan, but doesn't like flat out mold to itself. You want it a little bit liquidy, and then you can bake it. If you're going to do refrigerated brownies to either keep the strength and purity up or to add other entheogens, you're going to want a harder, denser dough. So you can add, mine was bakeable, liquidy. Last time I made it like baking liquidy. So I added a eighth of a cup of cocoa and an eighth of a cup of flour pre-mixed into it. And it was like the perfect thickness for cold baking or cold setting the brownies. Dosing. Just remember what percentage, look it up. Look what percentage your flour is supposed to be, right? So say if you're using something that's 20% THC. So in every gram, if you're putting a half ounce in a half a pan of brownies, you'll end up with 16 small brownies. You're going to have approximately 0.875 grams in a brownie. So say that's like 25 or 30% THC. That brownie is going to be 200 milligrams. So, and that's all you have to know. Whatever the percentage is, that's what percentage of matter is THC. That's what they're trying to tell you. I know that may sound like overkill or stupid to some of you guys, but some people really don't understand that. And I didn't until I baked for a long time. So 20% of all of that matter in your hand is THC. So what you're going to do is make sure that you know how much is going to each brownie. So if you do exactly what I told you, a brownie averaging a 25% strength, 22 to 25% strength is going to yield approximately a 200 milligram brownie or around that level. But it varies. It could be anywhere from, I think I did the math once, it could be anywhere from 130 to 210 based on the average THC content these days of what you're getting. But again, making it more soluble with the high saturated fat or lecithin is going to make it hit the system better. I say go gluten-free so that the compound can break apart in the system better and doesn't lag like gluten does. And same thing with the dairy. Why put stuff in there that your body's gonna have a harder time with? Give your body the flax. It's gonna give the whole point is to boost your physiology and take your body and mind for a spin, right? Whether you're doing it medicinally or recreationally. So having that ability to boost your physiology and strengthen the solubility, like why not? You know what I'm saying? All right. So I gave you a hot recipe, cold recipe. We covered dosing, activation. I got a very little bit of time left, but if I do have to cut this video off, you know what? We're just gonna go right into it. So why would you do this? Why would a yogi do this? I may have to make a separate video for this because this one's already going over. I'll do a brief video here and I'll decide how long I want to go there. So you're obviously going to change your strength depending on what you're doing. If you're a cancer patient trying to survive chemotherapy, you're going to play with the strength a little more than somebody who's not. And you're somebody in a terminal situation doesn't have anything to lose, so they'll be able to deal with or enjoy the panic attack a little more than somebody who's not. But the reason why these things are still illegal, you got to understand, is that thing I just told you to make, I just told you how to make a cup full of medicine. And if you drink that cup full of medicine, it could theoretically kill you. I haven't found any cases yet, but you should be aware that when you're doing these things, when you're looking at a half ounce, like the last time I made stuff, I'm looking at a big drink, one big drink for a half ounce of top grade flour is probably not going to kill you, but you're probably going to wish you were dead. I will warn you about that one before I get into this anymore. If one of your organs, God forbid, was not healthy, you could overload or even cook one of your organs, as what we call it in Qigong. And organ failure is a funny thing. So it actually would be your own weak organ not being prepared to do a thing that would kill you, not the cannabis. But I mean, if you got, your system hit that one organ not well and your body didn't process it well, I mean, yeah, your organs can fail in succession. As soon as one goes down, if you got another one, say you've got a battered liver and aren't aware that only one of your kidneys is functioning strong, and next thing your liver is overworking, having an issue, your kidney goes to back it up and can't because it's already damaged. These are the things that could happen. Again, there's never been a case of somebody dying from cannabis usage that I have found. And I think you have to smoke like 5 times your body weight. But no, it's definitely a dangerous compound. Like if you drink too much cannabis oil or ate too much cannabis oil, like on some real stuff, so like a real level, you'd mess yourself up. The amount of fear that you would experience from a panic attack that severe, and actually believing that you're going to die and possibly being stuck in that state for 2 to 6 hours. I mean, they say 2 hours, but if you've eaten too much, like a half ounce or a quarter ounce, yeah, you could be stuck like that for a day or two. I mean, you're definitely going to be wishing you were dead for 6 hours. You'll probably call the cops on yourself or something stupid like that. I've never done that, but I have been that overly medicated. So there's that. And that leads me into why I do it. This is not something that I do recreationally for fun. Like I want to relax. I'm going to do this. I do this after I have gotten healthy enough, built up enough chi, and enough and time to take a couple days off. And I like to practice I like to practice my yogi arts when I do these things, because as a yogi, I'm trained on what to do when I'm dying, how to help other how to help other people die. And I am fortunate enough to be in an existence where there's a plant that can mimic death very realistically without killing you, or simulate death without killing you, if you will. And I see it as greatly beneficial to anybody who wants to get over death, or learn how to master it, or practice their yogi arts. You might be really good at chanting or ritual, but how about when your brain tells you you're dying, or how good are you then? Um, and if you can't deal with that, then you definitely got no business trying to help other people die, because watching somebody else die is a lot harder to deal with than your own. When you're your own death, when you're dying or your brain thinks you're dying. I've died 8 times, by the way. Like my heart actually stopped, so I know what it's like to die. Um, I lost my train of thought there. No. When you're dying, it's just a matter of fear. But then when someone else is dying, people tend to lose composure. So if you do these types of things, or you plan to do these things, it's always good to understand them without experiencing them. You shouldn't have to die to be able to explain to somebody that you know what you're doing and you're trained and you can handle it. So I personally like to practice these things to prepare for my own death. So I don't take these things lightly. I'm not going to be like, what am I doing this Friday? The gnarliest panic attack I've ever had in my life in the yogi arts, way to unwind. Like now, I meditate. If I want to practice and my yogi arts, then I'll do something like take a little bit of cannabis oil. So beneficial. I'm not disagree, but uh, again, this is just so that people have a way of using cannabis for medicine, or if you're in a state where you traditionally do that. A lot of people don't understand how the industry is. If you've had edibles, you've probably had some like trim run distillate, lowest grade they could possibly, and it's not the same. So be very careful. Do batch working with a new strain, always sample stuff at a lower dose, and yeah, just be careful. Having a distillate torp forest when compound is not the same as having a medicinal compound that has been medicinally prepared and extracted properly. So there's a huge difference. Please be careful. I can't warn you enough. I don't want anybody having panic attacks, calling the cops saying that I told them to do this. I made it very clear this is for informational purposes and to talk to your doctor first. And again, you know, if you've never had a panic attack, I'm not telling you to go consume cannabis to initiate your first panic attack. This is something where if you've already experienced it and say you used to use cannabis but you stopped because you started having panic attacks, well, now you're constantly worried sober about death. Well, use a little bit of cannabis if your doctor agrees it's a good idea and get over that fear of dying. If you need to convince yourself you're dying and get over it, you have access to that compound, and I've told you how to use it here. And sometimes there are times where I do get to, I would call it enjoying it, but I wouldn't call it recreational. There are times where I can hit a certain point where I'm a lot more connected. And when I'm doing my meditations, yogas, or even my kung fu, I'm a lot more connected, and that's a completely different experience. But that's me splashing around inside of God as a yogi, as we do. That's different, and that usually comes much after the mantra stuff, because a lot of people don't understand that like the mantras that we do as yogis, there's a lot of reasons we have to do those things to reassure others and uh, call for backup depending on what the situation is. Knowing how to pray in Sanskrit has been very beneficial to me, and one of the first places times I learned about that was when I learned how to use this technique using cannabis for enlightenment and what the purpose of it would be in a human body. And I had gotten too far, and my brain thought I was dying, and I went right into yogi mode and just started chanting. I wasn't seeing ultimate reality or anything like us yogis can do sometimes. I mean, it's always there to some extent that you can see it, but I wasn't having like vivid experience of that. If you are on that level, but even when you're not there and you can feel it, and you start singing, life as a yogi is different when you're singing to God is there. And I shouldn't use the word God, but I have to because it's like this generation's own. You may say you believe in Goddess, universe, this or that, but when I say the word God, you know exactly what I'm talking about, and that's why we have to still use this word. I don't like using it either because it narrows the limit of what God could potentially be, which is completely unfathomable. But yeah, it's things are different, and then once you realize your yogi arts are training you to die, and then you have these panic attacks, then you don't see a panic attack as a bad thing. You'll start seeing your panic attacks as a medicinal tool. Like, oh, my brain's telling me I'm dying, I get to practice my stuff, and you just go into it. I mean, there's been times where, and I was doing it before I realized this too, like there were times where I used to go into panic attacks completely sober, and I would start doing the Amitabha prayer, because you learn in Tibetan Buddhism to pray for if your parents get you to come back to samsara, you say no, and you get Amitabha to take care of them. So I was practicing that. So I'd go right into the Amitabha mantra. If I thought I was dying and I was scared my parents, I wouldn't get to say bye to them or they'd say bye to me, I'd just start doing the Amitabha prayer, because it's like, Amitabha, if I'm going down, take care of my parents, bro. And just, I'd do a whole mala of Amitabha, the Om Mai Mayarani one. So, and again, that's that same thing you'll be doing, and you'll have to go through your own phases of how you're going to experience these things for yourself. Whether you're doing it for as a assistant to your chemo, or you're doing this to feng shui death. But yeah, just pace yourself, and you'll have to go through your layers. There'll be times where you're doing some Amitabha for your parents. There'll be times where you're just singing to what you can feel and see and know. Um, and I can honestly say that learning how to make butter lamps and pray in Sanskrit has been one of the most enriching experiences in my life as a human and as somebody who spent time growing up on cannabis and being told that it was like the most damning thing on the planet you could ever do. I don't agree. But again, if you're using it for an actual medicinal purpose, or you're using it to prepare for death or help you to be ready to comfort others at death, I don't see anything wrong with it. So that's just me standing by it. I felt a certain way about making this because I was afraid it would affect my reputation, but I want to have one of those like sterling reputations where all we have is honesty, and you don't ever have to worry about me bringing out those crazy secrets or skeletons out of the closet. You guys know everything about me if you watch this channel, so um, I think this should be public information. Every parent should know how to make a medicine like this, and it does help. There are other things obviously you would use it for in different doses. I mean, you can take it in very light doses for a mood stabilizer, very very light doses. But I mean, if somebody was in pain and you couldn't get them to a doctor for any reason, you just had this around, you can use it as a painkiller. It will stop the pain. So but I'm going to go on that note. Again, I am not a medical doctor prescribed to say any of these things. This video is for informational purposes only, but I do hope you enjoyed it. If you didn't enjoy it, I hope it was at least informative. And that's all I got for you on my oral dissertation of edible cannabis and panic attacks and yogi life. So thanks for stopping by the Broken Buddha. Peace and blessings.